Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're not a founding father or a battlefield legend or anyone whose name ends up carved on a monument. You're a Continental soldier, which mostly means you're underfed, overmarched, and rapidly becoming acquainted with the taste of your own teeth. You own a musket that misfires in damp air, boots that may or may not qualify as footwear, and a uniform that consists of whatever didn't rot first. You don't fight for glory. You fight because someone told you liberty was worth dying for, and then handed you a bayonet and no socks. Before the frostbite sets in, before you march 20 miles just to starve in a slightly different location, do me a favour. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd like early access to more bitter bedtime history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You didn't join the revolution out of principle. You joined because your stomach growled louder than your sense of caution. Because there was no land left to inherit, no job worth doing, and no future waiting back home, except slow starvation and someone else's boot on your neck. Maybe the farm failed. Maybe your father drank too much and died too young. Maybe you just got tired of watching the world pass you by. Or maybe someone in the tavern shouted about freedom loudly enough that it made you forget your better judgment for 5 minutes. That's all it took. The recruiter didn't ask many questions. He stood in the town square with a piece of parchment and a voice like a sermon, promising glory, pay, and rations, in that order. He called you a patriot before you even opened your mouth, said the cause needed good men. What he meant was, the cause needed any men. You fit the requirements simply by having arms and legs still attached. He handed you a pen and pointed to the line. You signed your name, or made your mark, or faked both. Either way, that was that. You were a soldier now, sort of. They didn't give you anything when you signed up. No musket, no boots, not even a farewell speech, just a nod, a vague instruction to head south, and the uneasy silence that comes with making a choice you can't take back. You walked the first miles alone, wondering if this would all start to make sense when you got to wherever there was. You passed towns you didn't know the names of, roads that weren't really roads. Sometimes you slept in barns, sometimes in ditches, sometimes under trees, your coat pulled tight, and your thoughts louder than the wind. You tried to picture what the army would be like. You imagined uniforms, flags, perhaps some kind of brass band, maybe a tent with stew, and a man who shook your hand and welcomed you to the cause. But the closer you got, the more it all seemed to fray. The people walking in the same direction looked just as hungry as you, just as ragged. One of them had no shoes. Another carried a kitchen knife, like it was a weapon. Nobody was singing. Nobody looked proud. They just looked tired. By the time you reached the camp, if it could be called that, the smell hit first. Damp earth, sweat, ash, and something else. Something wrong. You slowed your steps. No one greeted you. No one pointed where to go. The camp was a mess of tents and half-tents, and holes in the ground that looked like they'd been dug in panic, then forgotten. A man sat on a log eating something grey out of a tin. Another stood nearby, picking at his scalp like he was searching for answers in the lice. You stopped walking, unsure what to do next. The decision that had felt so bold in the tavern now hung around your neck like a millstone. You had expected something, anything, to feel official. Instead, everything felt temporary, as if this whole rebellion might pack up and leave in the night, as if the war itself was embarrassed to be here. A boy not much older than you looked up from where he was crouched, sharpening a stick into something vaguely pointy. He stared for a moment, then nodded toward an empty patch of dirt, like he was inviting you to take your place in the slow-motion collapse of a dream. You nodded back, because there was nothing else to do, and so you sat. The ground was cold, and the silence was heavy. You watched a column of smoke drift sideways across the trees. Somewhere in the distance, Someone coughed hard and didn't stop. You tried not to think about what came next, about the clothes you didn't have, the training you'd never received, the enemy you didn't understand. You tried not to think about what you'd just signed away for a crust of bread and a chance to matter. And in that moment, before the lice, before the freezing nights and the rotted shoes, before the first time you watched someone die face down in the mud, you felt something sharp and quiet in your gut. Not fear, not yet, just doubt. There's no official uniform. That was the first lie you caught in real time. Right after, we'll be properly equipped. You show up in whatever you owned before, a fraying shirt, breeches with a hole in the seat, and a pair of boots that might technically qualify as shoes if you squint and lie to yourself. The man beside you is wearing a coat that used to be red, but has since faded to a sad, greasy pink. He took it off a dead British soldier, and yes, it still smells like gunpowder and rot, but it's warmer than nothing. That's the bar now, warmer than nothing. They hand you a musket. It's not new, it's not even clean. It looks like it lost a duel with the bottom of a lake and was dried over a campfire. The flint is chipped, the barrel's rusted, and the stock is cracked in 2 places. You're told to cherish it anyway. It's your lifeline, your defence, your offence, your burden. It misfires half the time and kicks like a mule when it doesn't. You name it after the girl who left you. That feels fitting. There's no talk of standard issue anything. No matching coats, no polished buttons, no brass buckles or smart hats like the British wear. You get what's left, which is mostly nothing. If you're lucky, someone in camp trades you a wool coat missing a sleeve. If you're unlucky, you keep layering shirts until they rot off in pieces. The joke is that the best equipped soldiers are the ones who've been around long enough to loot the dead. Nobody laughs when they say it. It's not funny, it's just true. The boots are a special kind of torture. If you have them, they don't match. One may be a size too big, the other a size too small. Leather cracks in the cold, and soles peel away like dead skin. If you don't have boots, and many don't, you wrap your feet in cloth, rags, hay, whatever keeps frostbite from chewing through your toes. It doesn't work, but you do it anyway. By day 3, you start limping. By day 7, you stop noticing. The itch begins fast. You blame the wool at first. Then you realise it's moving. Lice, fleas, mites, creatures you didn't invite but who show up anyway. Like bad relatives. You scratch until your skin is raw. You boil your shirt in river water, then put it back on while it's still damp. Because it's the only shirt you have. The lice come back anyway. They always do. You stop trying to fight them and start naming them instead. Keeps things light. Your blanket is a riddle. It looks like it was once a rug, maybe, or a saddlecloth. It's too short to cover your legs and too thin to keep you warm. It smells like mildew and something worse. Something that breathes. You try not to think about it. You just shake it out, fold it over twice, and pray whatever's inside it doesn't bite. It usually doesn't. Usually. You're always cold. The kind of cold that gets into your teeth, your bones, your thoughts. The wind laughs through your coat. The fire never burns long enough. And when it does, the smoke chokes more than it warms. You huddle close to strangers, body heat passing between you like currency. At some point, you stop caring whose foot is in your back. Anything to stay warm. Then there's the hunger. It's not the sudden, sharp kind. It's the slow, gnawing sort. The kind that starts as a whisper and becomes the only voice in your head. Rations are sporadic. Sometimes you get hardtack, sometimes you get dried peas, and sometimes you get nothing at all. You try to be creative, boil grass, roast roots, steal from another tent when no one's looking. Once you saw a man eat half a candle. He said it was better than chewing on hope. By the end of the first week, you've started to understand something essential. Freedom is not a warm blanket or a full belly. It is a slogan with no nutrition. You believed in it once, maybe, in a vague, theoretical way. But belief doesn't keep you dry, and it sure as hell doesn't keep you fed. Every time you scratch your arm, or rub your frozen fingers, or spit out a mouthful of ash, you wonder, if maybe the British have a point. At least they wear real boots. But you don't say that out loud. That's the kind of thinking that gets you a bayonet in the back or worse, a speech from someone who still thinks this is noble. So you nod when they talk about sacrifice. You cheer when the general rides by on his borrowed horse. You wave a flag made from a torn shirt and call it hope. And when someone asks how you're holding up, you smile and say, fine. Because that's easier than admitting the truth. You've never been colder, hungrier, or more covered in things you can't identify. This isn't glory. This isn't heroism. This is survival. And some days, you're not even sure it's worth the effort. You imagined something different. Camp, in your mind, was supposed to have structure. Tents arranged in neat rows. Fires burning warmly beneath cooking pots. Men singing or sharing stories. Maybe even playing a fife or two. Camaraderie. Patriotism. Someone handing out stew. But when you actually arrive at the camp, all of that crumbles like soggy hardtack. There are tents, technically, but most a little more than torn canvas stretched over crooked poles. Half the men sleep on the bare ground. The other half sleep under it. There is no firewood. There is instead wet bark, clumps of moss, and the perpetual smell of something rotting just out of view. The smoke from the makeshift fires is so thick it curls low around the camp, like it's afraid to rise. It stings your eyes and settles in your throat. Every breath tastes like damp ash and something meat adjacent. Cooking, if it happens at all, involves tossing grey lumps into a blackened pot and hoping whatever floats can be chewed. The food, if you can call it that, is mostly hardtack and salted meat of indeterminate origin. The hardtack is older than most of the soldiers. It cracks your teeth and breaks your spirit. The meat might have once belonged to a cow, a pig, or something unlucky caught on the road. You don't ask. You just close your eyes and swallow. Hunger does that to a man. It makes you stop asking questions you don't want the answers to. The latrine is a trench someone dug too close to the tents. At first you hesitate to use it. Then you stop hesitating. Then you stop noticing the smell. The pit fills quickly and overflows in the rain. There is no soap, no clean water, no privacy. You learn to squat fast and breathe through your mouth. You also learn to tie your coattails up before crouching, unless you want to spend the rest of the day smelling like your own regret. Dysentery comes quickly. You hear the word whispered at first like a curse, then it spreads. The word and the disease. One man starts coughing blood. Another can't stand without shaking. Within a few days, you've got a whole row of bodies curled under blankets that aren't helping anymore. Some are moaning. Some have gone quiet. You lie awake at night, counting coughs, wondering who'll still be breathing come morning. You check your own pulse more often than you'd like to admit. The mud is constant. It clings to everything. Boots, clothes, fingers, faces. When it rains, it turns into soup. When it dries, it becomes a crust that cracks and falls into your food. You stop wiping it off after the first week. What's the point? There's no clean to return to. Your skin is stained, your nails are black, and your hair feels like it's been dipped in lard. You catch yourself scratching behind your ear and find something moving. You flick it off without thinking. That's normal now. There are rumours. There are always rumours. The British are on the move. The French are sending ships. General Washington is arriving tomorrow. The paymaster is dead. The paymaster never existed. The war is almost over. The war will never end. You stop believing any of it, but you still listen. It helps pass the time. One man swears he saw a redcoat surrender and gets shot anyway. Another claims his cousin was promised land if he makes it to the end. You try not to laugh or cry. Your commanding officer smells worse than the latrine pit. He's got 3 teeth, a rusted sword, and the permanent expression of a man who's been constipated since last autumn. He doesn't remember your name, probably doesn't care. He barks orders between swigs of something brown and sharp-smelling. You follow them because it's easier than getting screamed at. That's the hierarchy here. Seniority measured in stink, volume, And alcohol tolerance? You keep to yourself mostly. You sleep curled around your bag, not for comfort, but because someone stole your blanket on day 4 and you're afraid they'll take the bag next. You've learned not to trust anyone with dry socks. If they have dry socks, they've killed for them. Or worse, they've been assigned to kitchen duty, which means access to food scraps and a chance at survival. Some nights, someone plays a harmonica. It's out of tune and barely audible over the coughing, but it reminds you painfully of things like warmth and silence and dignity. You close your eyes and imagine a real bed, a clean shirt, a morning where you don't wake up gagging on smoke or stepping around vomit. Then the music stops and it's back to reality, a world of mud, rot, and the constant threat of being reassigned to dig more holes for more bodies. Still, you're alive, for now. And in this camp, that counts as winning. There was supposed to be training. At least, that's what you assumed. It made sense. You were handed a weapon, technically, and pointed toward the general direction of the enemy. Surely, someone would teach you how not to shoot yourself in the foot. But no one does. Your training consists of being screamed at until you figure out how to look busy. Yeah, there's a man who calls himself a drill sergeant, though no one's entirely sure who gave him the title. He barks orders at you in German, spits a lot, and hits things with a stick. That's the curriculum. Your musket is older than most of your ancestors. It misfires half the time, and you've already burned your thumb twice trying to load it. No one taught you how to clean it, and no one seems particularly interested in doing so now. When you ask a question, you're told to watch the others. That would be more helpful if the others knew what they were doing, but half of them load powder before the ball, and one poor soul keeps forgetting to remove the ramrod before firing. You decide not to stand near him anymore. Drills start at dawn, which sounds noble until you realise it's just an excuse for everyone to march in circles until their legs give out. The formations never match. One day it's columns, the next it's lines, and the day after that it's everyone jogging behind a goat that wandered into camp. You suspect the officers are making it up as they go, and they probably are. Nobody knows who's in charge, and the only person with a map refuses to share it because, apparently, strategy is classified. They teach you how to fire in volleys, sort of. The theory is that you all raise your muskets at the same time, fire together, then duck to reload while the line behind you shoots. It works in practice, if everyone times it right, which they don't. Half the unit forgets to load, a few forget to aim. Someone drops his powder horn, and someone else sets his sleeve on fire. The volley is more like a shrug with sound effects. Your bayonet is just a piece of iron you shove onto the end of your musket, and pray doesn't fall off when you charge. You're told never to take it off, because it's more useful than the actual firearm. That's probably true. At least the bayonet doesn't misfire in the rain. You jab at straw dummies until your shoulders burn, then at logs, then eventually at nothing, because the targets rot faster than they can be replaced. There's no consistency. One officer demands sharp turns and parade posture, another wants quick, dirty skirmish tactics. A third just drinks behind a tree and mutters about Saratoga. You try to follow orders, but they contradict each other so quickly that eventually you stop listening altogether. You march when someone yells march and stop when someone yells idiot. That seems to cover most of it. They don't bother explaining the chain of command. Everyone is either a private or a captain, and most of the captains don't have uniforms or paperwork. Rank is based less on merit and more on who showed up early enough to yell first. You follow the loudest man in the room and hope he points in the right direction. If not, you blame it on the French. That seems to be the fallback plan for most things. Fatigue becomes a training tool. They march you until your blisters bleed and call it discipline. They make you dig trenches through frozen ground and call it readiness. You don't learn how to fight exactly. You learn how to not die while waiting to fight. There's a difference, a grim one, but you don't complain. Complaining gets you assigned to latrine detail, and you've seen what happens to men who draw that straw. Sometimes an officer gives a speech about courage and duty. You nod like you believe it, even as you're coughing through the smoke of a fire made from wet pine and frozen dung. You're handed a pamphlet with a poorly drawn diagram showing flanking manoeuvres. You use it to wipe your hands because the ink has already smudged into nonsense. The idea of studying battle plans while your teeth chatter from cold would be funny if it weren't your life. The only real education comes from watching other men mess up. You memorize their mistakes and quietly try to avoid repeating them. One man forgets to cover his powder horn in the rain and ends up with a useless musket. Another charges too soon in a mock skirmish and gets his head bashed in by a panicked farmhand wielding a shovel. You take notes mentally. Do this. Don't do that. Survive. By the end of the second week, your muscles ache in places you didn't know existed. Your hands are raw from handling rope, muskets and mud. Your brain has adjusted to a new rhythm. Follow, mimic, obey, question nothing. You've stopped asking when the real training starts. You've accepted that it won't. This is the training. Chaos, contradiction, and pain. And apparently, that's enough to make you battle ready. You thought marching would be the easy part. How hard could walking be? You've been doing it your whole life. To the river, to the fields, to nowhere in particular. But that was before you were asked to do it for 20 miles a day, underweight, on half rations, through terrain that barely qualifies as ground. Now, every step feels like a betrayal. By your body, by your boots, by the men who told you this was a noble cause and not an extended death hike through God's forgotten backyard. There aren't really roads, not in the way you imagined. No smooth dirt paths lined with trees and taverns. No cobbles, just deep, rutted trails carved by wagon wheels that didn't survive the last rainstorm. Sometimes you follow what looks like a road, only to realise it's a dried out stream bed. Other times, you just follow the man in front of you and hope he's not as lost as you are. There are no signs, no milestones, and no sense of progress, just mud, insects, and the sound of men swearing through clenched teeth. You carry everything you own on your back. That includes a musket that weighs more the longer you walk, a half-filled powder horn, a mouldy satchel with broken stitching, and whatever rations you've been able to hoard, which is usually a crust of hardtack wrapped in oily cloth. Your canteen leaks. Your coat is too warm when it's sunny and too thin when it rains, which is always. The strap from your gear digs into your collarbone until the skin breaks. You keep walking anyway. There's no option not to. Blisters come quickly. First, a raw spot on your heel, then 2, then 4, then the skin peels off and the bleeding starts. You try stuffing rags into your boots to cushion it. That just traps the blood better. You consider taking them off, but you've seen what happens to the men who try that. Feet swell, wounds fester. The march doesn't stop just because your toes are turning black. So you limp, quietly, because no one cares and there's nothing they could do if they did. The hunger makes everything worse. You're on half rations again, which is a polite way of saying they gave you a spoonful of beans and a lie. The salt pork is mostly gristle and bone, and it smells like it was packed during the last war. You eat it anyway. Then you chew a piece of leather from your satchel and pretend it's jerky. You're not even sure if you're hungry anymore. It's just a hollow ache now, a constant pressure behind your ribs that flares when you stop walking and briefly remember what food once tasted like. The stink is its own kind of punishment. Your feet smell like wet bread and rotting meat. Your shirt hasn't been washed in weeks, and your body produces something between vinegar and despair. You pass the occasional dead animal, a bloated cow, a pile of feathers that used to be a chicken, a horse with its ribs showing through torn hide. The heat cooks everything from the inside out. The air tastes like decay. You try breathing through your mouth until you realise that only makes it worse. There's no enemy in sight. That's what gnaws at you most. You're not marching to a battle. You're not pursuing a retreating force or defending a city. You're just walking. Walking toward the idea of war. toward where someone thinks the enemy might be. And every time you ask why or where or when, the officer at the front snaps that it's strategic repositioning. As if that makes a difference to your bleeding heels. Your comrades don't speak much. Some mutter to themselves. Some curse under their breath. A few sing just to keep pace, but it always fades out by mile 5. You watch men start strong and then falter. One drops his musket. Another starts vomiting behind a tree and doesn't return. A third wanders off into the woods, and no one stops him. You wonder if you'll see him again. You doubt it. He'll probably die somewhere off the trail and feed the crows. That's still better than dying in formation. At one point someone shouts that we're near. Near what? No one says. A supply point? A skirmish? A river? The word spreads like wildfire anyway. Near. And everyone straightens just enough to keep walking. That's all hope is out here. A rumour that the pain might stop soon. And when the sun starts to set, and you're still surrounded by nothing but trees and mud, you know the truth. You're not near anything, but more of the same. Eventually the column stops, not because you've reached a destination, but because someone up front decided to collapse for the night. You set down your gear and sit in the dirt, your legs still twitching, like they haven't gotten the message yet. You take off your boots and check the damage. It's worse than you thought. Your socks are stiff with dried blood. The skin beneath is slick, angry, and torn. You wrap your feet in a spare shirt sleeve and hope it holds. Then you lie down. No fire, no blanket, just dirt, bugs, and the faint sound of another man crying softly into his coat. You don't blame him. You nearly join him. But instead you stare at the stars through the tree branches and wonder how many more miles they expect you to walk before you find the war you supposedly signed up for. The first time someone tries to kill you on purpose, it doesn't feel heroic. It feels loud, disorienting, wet. You've heard stories about bravery in battle, the charge, the clash, the noble roar of freedom. But when it happens, it's just chaos, screaming, gunpowder, and the unmistakable stench of burning wool and blood. Your orders are simple. Form a line, hold the line, fire when commanded. You don't know who thought that was a good idea. Probably someone far away and very safe. You're lined up with the others, shouldering your musket, your stomach already trying to crawl out through your throat. You're shaking. Everyone is. That part doesn't get mentioned in speeches. The fear isn't dramatic or cinematic. It's small, sharp and constant. Like a nail tapping against your spine. You're trying to load your powder without dropping it, but your fingers are numb from the cold and the panic. Someone drops their ramrod. Someone else drops their musket. Nobody moves to help. There's no time. Then it begins. A sound like thunder cracked sideways across the earth. The first British volley rips through the air with military precision, and men start dropping before you even know where it came from. One falls sideways into the mud. Another stumbles back with his hand on his chest and says, "Oh," like he just remembered something important. You can't hear anything over the sound of your own breathing and the sudden choking wall of smoke that envelops the field. You fire, or at least you think you do. The musket bucks in your hand, but it's impossible to tell if the ball hit anything other than fog and trees. You start reloading because that's what you were told to do. Bite cartridge, pour powder, ram ball, raise musket. The drill that seemed pointless a week ago is now the only thing keeping your hands moving. You fumble it anyway. You spill powder, load too little, jam the ramrod. It doesn't matter. No one is watching. Everyone's too busy trying not to die. The smoke is everywhere. It clings to your face, your throat, your eyes. You can barely see the man next to you, let alone any enemy. Occasionally, the cloud breaks just enough for you to glimpse red coats moving through the trees, neat, synchronized, terrifying in their calm. They have drums, fifes, discipline. You have damp socks and a vague sense of betrayal. They fire again. Another wave of thunder, more men fall. You flinch too late, your body always a second behind your brain. Then come the cannons. You didn't know they had them. Nobody said anything about cannons. The first shot lands 50 feet away and sends a spray of dirt and wooden shrapnel into the air. The sound is indescribable, not just loud but final. Your ears ring, your legs go numb. You watch a tree explode and wonder if you imagined it. You didn't. The second shot lands closer. A man screams. You don't look. Around you, the line disintegrates. It doesn't break, it melts. Men run or freeze or drop to the ground and pray the mud will hide them. Someone shouts, "Hold," but nobody listens. You'd hold if you knew what direction the enemy was even in. The smoke has become its own battlefield. You fire again, purely out of habit. Maybe you hit something. Maybe you hit a bird. Either way, your fingers are bleeding and your shoulder feels like it's been kicked by a horse. You don't run. Not because you're brave, you just don't know where to go. Running means turning your back, and you're not sure your legs would obey anyway. So you crouch, reload, and try not to think about the man who just fell next to you, his boot twitching in the mud like it hasn't accepted the situation yet. You glance at him once, then decide you don't want to know his name. You might have shared bread with him yesterday. Eventually the officers shout retreat. They call it an orderly withdrawal, but there's nothing orderly about it. You scramble back through the trees, heart hammering, your mouth full of smoke and bile. Your hands shake too hard to reload. You drop your powder horn, you leave it. You trip, land in the mud, crawl for a few feet, and find yourself next to 3 men who are just as dirty and stunned as you. One of them is laughing. Not because it's funny, because he's cracked. It happens sometimes. When you finally stop, you realise you're still alive. Your ears are still ringing. Your musket is gone. Your coat has a tear across the back you don't remember getting. You touch your side just to be sure. No blood, just bruises and adrenaline. The officers are shouting again, trying to reassemble what's left. About half of the men are gone. A quarter ran in the opposite direction. The rest are coughing, bleeding, or staring into space. You did what you were supposed to do. You followed orders, you fired your weapon, you stood your ground, more or less. And now, you are officially something different. Not stronger, not wiser. Just changed. You've seen a man die, you've smelled burning hair, you've watched a cannonball bounce once before tearing a body in half. You're not a recruit anymore. You're not green. Congratulations, you're a veteran. You weren't wounded, not this time. And that's the only reason you're still here, sitting against a tree, with your hands shaking and your musket jammed with mud. But you saw what happened to the ones who weren't so lucky. You heard it before you saw it. The screams. Not the fast ones, not the ones that cut off halfway through. The long ones. The ones that went on until the throat gave out, or the blood did. They set up a field hospital behind the line, which is a generous phrase for a patch of trampled earth and a blood-soaked blanket. There's no real shelter, just a tent with one side collapsed and a collection of surgical tools laid out on a crate, like someone was planning to fix a fence, not a man. No beds, no clean water, no peace. The moment a wounded soldier is dragged in, the surgeon, a man who looks like he hasn't slept since the last season, starts sawing before the patient even finishes screaming. You saw them carry one man in with a gut wound. He was still clutching his powder horn like it mattered. His shirt was red for all the wrong reasons. They didn't even try. Just shook their heads and let him lie there until he stopped breathing. Another had taken a ball through the arm. Clean shot, relatively speaking. He lost the whole arm anyway. Not because it couldn't be saved, but because amputation is faster than surgery. An infection is already assumed. They don't ask if you want to keep the limb. They just hold you down and start cutting. The tools aren't sanitized. They're wiped, if that. Dipped in whiskey or rinsed in whatever water hasn't turned green. You've watched the same saw go from one man's leg to another man's arm without so much as a pause. Blood runs in small rivulets downhill. Flies gather. A second man with shaky hands holds the limb steady, muttering a prayer he probably doesn't believe. Sometimes the patient passes out, sometimes they don't. That's when the screaming gets biblical. If you ever get wounded, and you think about this often now, you know exactly what awaits. First, they'd strip your coat off, tearing the fabric whether they need to or not. Then the surgeon would jab a finger into the wound to see how deep it is, as if your body were a pie. He'd make a decision based on speed, not need. If it's bad, they'd cut. If it's worse, they'd leave you behind. There is no middle option. Infection is expected. It's not a matter of if, just how soon. You've seen men with minor cuts swell up and die in 3 days. The stench is unmistakable. That sickly sweet rot that clings to your nose, long after the man is gone. They don't isolate the sick. There's nowhere to put them. You sleep 2 feet from a man leaking pus, hoping whatever's eating him from the inside doesn't decide to try you next. The lucky ones get whiskey before the blade. Most don't. Supplies are short and nerves are shorter. You watched one man chew on a stick while they hacked his foot off at the ankle. He broke 3 teeth. Didn't make a sound though. You wonder if that was courage or shock, or maybe both, tangled together in a grim sort of numbness. He died 2 days later from fever, after all that effort. No one talks about recovery. You don't see a lot of convalescents around here. Men either walk again, or they don't. And if they don't, they're often left behind when the unit moves. Logistics, they call it. But it looks a lot like abandonment. You passed a man with no leg once, left propped against a tree with a crust of bread and half a canteen. He was humming. You still don't know whether that was hope or madness. You've heard rumours about hospitals in cities, real ones, with sheets and beds and doctors who wash their hands. But those places are for officers, maybe, not for you. You're a body in a borrowed coat with no rank and fewer prospects. If something happens to you, your medical care will come with a saw, a rag, and a prayer. And probably not in that order. So now, every time you feel a scratch or a bruise, you check it obsessively. Every splinter is a potential death sentence. Every ache might be the start of something you can't afford to let grow. You sleep lightly, waking to inspect yourself by moonlight, running your fingers over your limbs, like you're taking inventory. Still there, still working, still intact, for now. You're not superstitious, but you've started carrying a small charm in your coat pocket. Just a button you found in the mud. It belonged to someone once, someone who probably bled out in the grass. But it's yours now, and it hasn't failed you yet. You rub it between your fingers when you feel the fever dreams creeping in. You tell yourself it's protection. It probably isn't. But around here, that's better than nothing. Valley Forge isn't a battlefield. It's the part of the war where nobody shoots you, but you still die anyway. Slowly, quietly, without the honour of a bullet or the drama of a cannonball. You arrive with the rest of the army just in time for the cold to start biting properly. The kind of cold that works its way into your bones and stays there, coiled like a parasite. You feel it in your teeth, in your breath, in your thoughts. They assign you to a log hut. That sounds cosy until you realise it's just stacked timber, no insulation, with gaps wide enough to watch the wind pass through. You're lucky, they say. Some men are still sleeping in tents, or what's left of them. Your hut houses 12 men. You lie shoulder to shoulder, curled like spoons, wrapped in everything you own, and a few things you've stolen. It doesn't matter. The cold gets in anyway. You wake up shivering and go to sleep colder. The floor is dirt, the ceiling leaks. The fire, when you can get it going, smokes more than it warms, and you have to choose between choking or freezing. Some nights you just sit by the embers and listen to the wood creak as it settles, praying it doesn't collapse in the night. You've stopped dreaming. Or maybe you still do, but they're just dreams about soup or bread, or waking up with all your fingers. There isn't enough food. There's never enough food. What little you get is either mouldy or frozen solid. Sometimes they give you flour and nothing to cook it with. So you mix it with melted snow and call it porridge. Sometimes you chew it raw and pretend it's gritty cheese. On the rare occasion you get meat, you don't ask where it came from. You just eat it fast before someone decides you don't deserve it. Your toes are turning black. At first you thought they were just numb. Then the colour changed. Then the pain stopped, which ironically is worse. You rub them furiously every night, hoping circulation will return. One man in your hut lost 3 toes already. Another lost both feet. They carried him out one morning and didn't bring him back. No one said anything. There's nothing to say. You just shuffle over to the space he used to occupy and pretend it was always yours. Firewood is more valuable than gold. You're sent out in shifts to scavenge for it. It's all frozen, of course, and most of it is wet. You learn how to tell if bark will burn by smell alone. You also learn how to steal someone else's stash without being caught. Ethics have a shorter shelf life than rations. Some men rip floorboards out of their own huts just to get through the night. You understand. You've considered it. Disease is everywhere. Typhoid, dysentery, pneumonia. Names you barely understood before now. Roll off your tongue like old friends. The sick are packed together in makeshift infirmaries where they cough themselves hoarse and stare blankly at nothing. There are no real doctors, just men with knives and theories. No one wants to end up there, but sooner or later, most do. You're holding out, barely, but every cough feels like the beginning of the end. Washington walks the camp sometimes. Tall, stoic, dramatic. He looks clean. That's what sticks with you. The man doesn't look like he's been sleeping in a pigsty full of corpses and frostbite. He nods to the men like he's grateful. You nod back like you believe it. Leadership is, apparently, about posture and coats that button properly. He gives speeches sometimes, talks about perseverance and the future of the Republic. You'd clap if your hands weren't frozen stiff. Some men desert. You don't blame them. They slip off into the woods at night, faces pale and tight, shoes wrapped in rags. You hope they make it somewhere warm. You also hope they don't, because if they do, it means you're a fool for staying. But you do stay, because there's nowhere to go, because you're too tired, because at this point, leaving would feel like quitting a job you never asked for in the first place. Time doesn't move at Valley Forge. Days blur into nights, nights into more cold. You mark time by who dies and who disappears. One man started muttering about roasted chicken every night in his sleep. You used to laugh, then he stopped waking up. You didn't laugh after that. Another man gave you a crust of bread without being asked. You almost cried. You don't remember his name. You wish you did. You keep a scrap of cloth in your coat pocket, torn from a flag that once flew proudly over the camp before the wind shredded it. You don't know why you kept it. It doesn't keep you warm. It doesn't taste like anything. But it reminds you that this was supposed to mean something. That somewhere, someone still believes in what you're doing. It's not much, but it's enough to make you get up again when your muscles scream at you to stay down. Valley Forge isn't a battlefield. It's a graveyard without headstones. And if you make it out alive, it won't be because you were brave. It'll be because you were stubborn. By the time winter starts to lift its icy boot from your throat, half your unit is gone. They don't die all at once, like in battle. They just evaporate, one by one. Sometimes a man disappears overnight, leaving behind his blanket and half a biscuit. Sometimes he slips out in daylight, mumbling about fetching water and never coming back. No one stops them. No one even asks where they're going anymore. There are no consequences, just silence. You don't blame them. You think about deserting every single night. You lie awake staring at the beams overhead, chewing your tongue, mentally calculating the distance between here and nowhere. If you left now, how far could you get before your feet gave out? Would anyone come after you? Probably not. There's no one left to send. And even if there were, who could blame a man for wanting to live through this? But then the real question hits. Where would you even go? Your home's gone. The last letter you got months ago said the farm was taken, the barn burned. Your brother vanished in New Jersey. Your father died of fever. and your mother stopped writing. Or maybe she just stopped being alive. You wouldn't know. You've outlived the only anchors you had. There's no hearth to return to, no warm stew waiting in a pot, no dog barking at your footsteps. There's just a memory that gets dimmer every time you try to picture it. And what's worse, you're not even sure who your side is anymore. The British, the Loyalists, the rebels, the regulars, all of it has bled together into one long string of misery, punctuated by gunpowder. Your state declared independence, then half the people in it sided with the crown. Neighbours turned on neighbours. Your cousin was probably a loyalist last you checked, unless someone hanged him for it. There are no clear lines left, just mud and suspicion and smoke. So you stay, out of habit more than anything else. Not out of hope. That burned out around the same time your boots did. You stay because leaving would mean making a choice, and you've forgotten how. It's easier to follow orders, sleep in the same lice-ridden corner, eat the same flavourless mush, and pretend it still matters. Routine becomes religion. It fills the space where belief used to be. The officers say things like, "We must maintain morale." They pin it on a board like it's a spare bayonet, as if it can be assigned or requisitioned. They tell stories of victories in other colonies, flash names like Saratoga and cowpens like medals. You nod because that's what you're supposed to do. But it's all theatre. You're too tired for illusions. No one in your hut has smiled in weeks without it looking painful. Some men joke, but the jokes are darker now. At least if we get shot, we'll be warm for a second. I heard the British have bread that doesn't crunch like gravel. If we desert together, we can start a bakery in Quebec. No one laughs, not really. Just that nasal exhale that pretends to be humour, but actually means we've thought about it. All of it, in detail. Your sergeant tries to give a speech once, says we're turning the tide, that we're the backbone of the revolution. He uses words like valour and grit. He's shaking as he says them, probably from hunger or rage or some combination of both. No one interrupts, no one claps. When he's done, someone mutters, "What's valour taste like?" And the whole tent goes quiet. No one has an answer. Mail stops coming. You used to get letters once in a while. Now it's nothing. The last man who got one read it out loud and cried halfway through. It was a recipe from his wife. Just a recipe. Stew with onions and sage and something called butter. He read it like scripture. Now he keeps the scrap of paper tucked into his boot, probably for warmth more than sentiment. You envy him. At least he has something written in a hand that isn't made of orders. You try to write once, a letter to nobody in particular. You don't finish it. Not because there's nothing to say, but because you forget what your handwriting is supposed to look like. You crumple the paper and use it to light the fire the next morning. That feels more useful. The men who remain aren't patriots, not anymore. They're just stuck, frozen in place by inertia. Maybe they'll make it through, maybe not. But leaving takes strength, and so does dying. So most of you choose the third option, enduring. Not out of courage, but because you've already given everything else away. Your time, your strength, your hope. What's left is routine. Wake up, scratch, eat, march, freeze, sleep, repeat. And if the officers call that morale, well, let them. They're the ones who still think this war has a plan. One morning, a man with better boots than you announces that France has joined the war. There's cheering, or at least an attempt at it. A few scattered hurrahs from men who still have vocal cords that work. Someone tries to play a fife. It breaks, but the message is clear. We have allies now. Real ones, with uniforms, with ships, with actual food. There's talk of victory, of turning tides, of how this changes everything. Except it doesn't. Not for you. What France brings is mostly noise. Officers shout more now. Orders multiply. There are drills again. This time, with exaggerated hand gestures to impress the newcomers. The French arrive in crisp blue coats and polished boots, smelling faintly of wine and soap. You haven't smelled soap in so long, it hits you like perfume. They march in neat rows with drums and banners, their uniforms unbloodied, their spirits high. It's impressive. It's infuriating. They bring cannons, real ones, with wheels that aren't falling apart and barrels that don't crack in the cold. The officers are ecstatic. They touch the cannons like sacred relics, like something divine has finally graced your pathetic little army. You're told this is a turning point. What you're not told is whether you'll get to use one. You won't. You're still carrying the same musket with the cracked stock and loose trigger. The cannons stay up front, behind the officers, behind the French, behind the line where men actually bleed. There's wine now, but not for you. That's for the officers. They toast in French, eat cheese that doesn't taste like wood shavings, and pretend not to see you watching. Occasionally, one tosses a half-eaten crust toward the enlisted men, like he's feeding pigeons. You consider catching it once, then remember what dignity used to feel like. You let it hit the mud and move on. Better that than get into a fistfight over crumbs from someone else's alliance. You thought French involvement might mean better supplies. It doesn't. Your rations are the same. Beans, hardtack and prayers. The officers get extra. They always do. You still wake up cold. You still sleep in a damp shirt. You still wrap your feet in cloth and hope the sores don't spread. But now, you get to do it next to someone humming the Marseillaise under their breath, which somehow makes it all feel more ridiculous. The real difference France brings is more war, bigger war, faster war, louder war, with more shouting, more expectations, and more chances to die for reasons that aren't explained to you. The French want to prove themselves, and you're the backup dancers in their grand debut. They take the front of the column sometimes, but never for long. Not when the ground gets messy or the enemy starts aiming low. That's still your job. Bayonet first, body second. The officers have started calling things combined operations, which is just a fancy way of saying they're making it up even harder now. They argue more often, the American ones and the French ones, usually about strategy, sometimes about who speaks worse English. You watch them bicker over maps, while you're still trying to figure out where breakfast is supposed to come from. You don't care who wins. You just want the war to end before your socks fully disintegrate. You're sent on more marches. The pace is faster. The goalposts are vaguer. It's always positioning for coordination or preparing for joint movement. You're not fooled. You're being moved like a pawn, so someone in a powdered wig can feel important. The French troops get wagons. You get blisters. Your captain says this is what victory looks like. You believe him, just not in the way he means. Some of the French soldiers are friendly. One shares a piece of dried fruit with you. It tastes like sunlight. You nearly weep. Another tries to teach you a phrase in French, something about courage or brotherhood. You nod politely and forget it immediately. There's no room in your brain for extra words, just mud, gunpowder, and the low, dull chant of survival. The battles get bigger, not cleaner, just louder. There's more smoke, more cannon fire, more flags you don't recognise. The French officers bark orders with theatrical flair, and your own officers try to keep up, shouting twice as loud to cover the confusion. You reload until your fingers bleed, fire into walls of smoke, and hope that somewhere out there, someone knows what they're doing. It's probably not you, and yet morale somehow ticks upward. Not yours, but the officers. They walk taller, they speak with more certainty, some even smile. It's amazing what access to decent bread and imported alcohol can do for a man's worldview. You, meanwhile, are still sleeping on rocks and eating whatever didn't spoil in the last wagon. But you're told this is progress, and you nod, because what else is there to do? So yes, the French showed up. They brought flair, firepower, and a whole new set of expectations. You got none of those. You got more marching, more battles, and the privilege of bleeding near better-dressed allies. But the officers are drinking Bordeaux now instead of swamp whiskey, and they keep saying we're close to winning. That's something, right? Hunger changes you, not all at once. It creeps in, slow and patient, like mould on bread, or what used to be bread. At first you think it's manageable, just a little empty feeling in the gut, something that'll pass when the next supply wagon rolls in. But the wagons stop coming, or they come half full, or they come looted, or they come burned. And the hunger doesn't pass. It settles, it sinks its teeth in, and stays. You learn quickly that promises of rations are just that, promises. Most days you get a crust of hardtack that you have to crack with the butt of your musket, soaked in river water to soften it into something resembling food. If you're lucky, you get beans. If you're really lucky, you get pork, more bone than meat, more salt than flavour. Usually, you just get nothing. Or worse, you get told food is coming. It never is. So you steal. Not because you're a bad man, but because it becomes necessary. Everyone does it. From each other mostly. A biscuit here, a spoonful of cornmeal there. If someone turns their back, their satchel gets lighter. If someone dies, you're at the body before the flies are. Not for sentiment, not for mourning. Just to check the pockets. Maybe he had a scrap of jerky tucked away. Maybe he left a crumb in his boot. Sometimes you steal from locals, farmers who weren't lucky enough to evacuate before the army came through. You knock on their door. If you're feeling polite, break it down if you're not. You've helped empty pantries. You've watched chickens run for their lives. Once you saw a man cut open a feed sack and eat the oats by the handful. He didn't even chew, just swallowed, like he thought it would fill the emptiness faster. It didn't. You stop being picky. You stop being ashamed. You eat bark if it's soft enough to peel. You boil leather scraps from your boots and chew them until your jaw aches. You eat rats if you can catch them. Squirrels if you're lucky. You tried candle wax once, just a bite. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't food either, but that doesn't stop you. Hunger doesn't care about definitions. It just wants filling. You dream about bread. Thick, warm, soft bread, torn from a loaf and dripping with butter you haven't seen in years. You'd trade a limb for it. Probably your left one. Maybe even the right, if you could keep the foot. You dream about stews too. Potatoes, onions, a few carrots, chunks of meat that don't require guesswork. You wake up drooling and furious. You curse your own mind for dangling comfort you can't afford. Hunger dulls everything. Your senses go first. You don't notice smells anymore, except the smell of food. That still cuts through, even the suggestion of it. The whiff of roasting fat will turn your head like a dog. Your thoughts slow next. You forget things, names, directions, conversations. You get lost in your own sentences. You speak in fragments. So does everyone else. It's the new language of starvation. Then your conscience goes. You stop caring who you steal from. You stop flinching when someone else goes hungry, so you don't. Once, a man in your unit passed out beside the fire. You noticed his bread crust had fallen from his coat. You took it. You didn't think. You just moved. He woke up and cried when he couldn't find it. You looked away. That night, you slept with a full belly and hated yourself just a little. But only a little. Eventually, you stop standing up straight. You hunch, you shuffle, your legs ache for no reason. You get dizzy when you stand too fast. You sit whenever you can, even if the ground is wet. Your hands shake when you try to load your musket. Your teeth feel loose. You check them every morning to make sure they're still there. You're not even sure why. It's not like there's anything left to chew. There are fights, small ones, petty ones, brutal ones. A man finds a hidden apple, and 3 others try to take it. Another accuses someone of hoarding beans. It ends with a cracked rib and a missing tooth. There's no punishment, no justice, just a scolding and a reshuffling of tents. Everyone goes to bed hungry, just in new positions. You learn not to speak when you're hungry, which means you're quiet all the time. When new recruits show up with round faces and full packs, you stare at them like meat. You try to be polite. Try not to envy them out loud, but their boots are better, their gear untouched, and their rations intact. You watch them eat and pretend you're not watching. Later, you rifle through their things while they sleep. Not to steal everything, just enough to take the edge off. You stop thinking in terms of days, you think in meals, or missed meals. If someone asks what day it is, you shrug. But if they ask when you last ate, you can tell them to the hour. Hunger makes you honest. It strips away all the decorations, the patriotism, the speeches, the cause. All that's left is the animal, staring at the bottom of an empty pot, wondering how far it can go on fumes. And the worst part? You're not even surprised anymore. Eventually someone snaps. It's not always dramatic. No shouted speeches or drawn swords. Sometimes it's just a man standing up in the middle of roll call and saying, "No," like he's refusing a second helping at dinner. Other times it's louder, fists slammed on tables, muskets raised, voices breaking like dry twigs. The reasons vary, but they all come from the same root: exhaustion, starvation, betrayal. You can only be told soon so many times before now starts to feel like a demand. Sometimes it's you, not a full mutiny, not quite, just a moment. You're told to dig another latrine pit, or to clean a weapon that doesn't even work, or to stand in formation for 3 hours while an officer explains how liberty is a sacred fire. And something in you freezes. You stare at him and think, "My boots have holes, my stomach's been empty for 2 days, and you're quoting poetry." You don't say it. You just don't move. And for a long second, no one does. Then you blink, shift your weight, and do it anyway. Because that's how mutiny usually ends. Not with a bang, but a sigh. The pay is a joke. You haven't seen a coin in 6 months. Some haven't in a year. At first, they gave you paper notes, official-looking slips signed by someone in Congress. You kept them in your coat like they meant something. Now they're shredded, burned, used to patch holes or start fires. One man tried to buy a loaf of bread with one. The merchant laughed in his face. You think about that a lot. How even starving civilians understand what your service is worth? You try not to care. You tell yourself this is about the cause, the dream, the country being born from all this mud and misery. But dreams don't patch your boots. Dreams don't fill your gut. Dreams don't stop the wind from slicing through your coat at midnight. The officers say duty. You say shoes. They say glory. You say, then you wear this coat for a week and get back to me. Whispers grow like mould. Quiet at first, then everywhere. Plans muttered around campfires, eyes darting to see who's listening. We should march to Philadelphia. Take what they owe us. Make Congress see what it's done. It's half bluff, half desperation. Nobody knows what they'd actually do if they got there. But saying it out loud feels good. Feels like control. Feels like something other than just taking orders from a man who sleeps on a feather mattress while you share lice with a rat. One morning you wake to shouting. Men from another regiment, New Jersey maybe, are on the march, not toward battle, toward the people who promised them pay and gave them sermons instead. They're armed, angry, determined. You hear officers scrambling. There's panic, not over the enemy, over their own soldiers. That's when you realise how fragile this whole thing is. Not because of redcoats or cannon fire, but because even a threadbare army can tear itself apart when it's starved enough. They send delegates, promises are made, back pay, rations, better treatment. Some of it even comes true. A few silver coins appear, enough to quiet the noise, for now. But you see it for what it is, not a solution, just a delay, a bandage over a gangrenous wound. The rot is still there, under the surface, and everyone knows it. There are punishments, of course. A few men are made examples of. Not the worst offenders, just the most visible. They're flogged, tied to posts, paraded in front of their peers. The message is clear. Don't get caught. That's the real crime. You watch one man take 20 lashes for refusing to carry a shovel. The next day, you volunteer to carry 2, not out of fear, just because it's easier than bleeding in public. The officers keep talking about discipline, about the importance of unity and chain of command. You listen with a face carved from stone. They think silence means obedience. Really, it just means you've stopped wasting breath. You and the men around you move like ghosts now. Shadows that dig, march, fire, reload, and sleep. You follow orders not because you believe, but because rebellion takes energy. And you're all too tired to finish the rebellion inside the rebellion. Still the anger simmers, quiet, patient. You see it in the way men grip their muskets, in the way they watch the officers eat better meals, in separate tents, in the way they share food and rumours, but not trust. You're not brothers anymore. You're not comrades. You're survivors occupying the same ruin. If the enemy charged right now, you'd fight. Not because of honour, but because it's something to aim at. Something that isn't wearing a powdered wig and quoting Cicero while you try to scratch your rash with one hand and hold your pants up with the other. And so the army stumbles forward, patched together with lies and rage, held upright by nothing but shared fatigue. It doesn't collapse. It should. But it doesn't. Because no one has the strength to push it over. At some point the war stops feeling like an event and starts feeling like a condition. Not something you fight, but something you live with. Like a cough that never leaves. Like a limp you stop noticing. It's not a war anymore. It's just your life now. And a bad one at that. There's no clear beginning or end. Just a long, damp, shivering middle. The years blur together. The seasons change, but the mud stays the same. Spring is wet, summer is hot, fall is cold, and winter is cruel. Then it starts again. You forget what year it is. You forget the names of half the towns you've marched through. You forget what your voice used to sound like before it was reduced to coughing, grunting, and the occasional muttered curse. Someone tells you it's 1780. You nod like that means something. It doesn't. The faces around you age, but slowly. Not with grace, not with wisdom. They just get thinner, harder, more hollowed out. Eyes sink deeper. Teeth disappear. Laughter becomes rare. And when it does appear, it sounds brittle, like something sharp about to snap. The new recruits arrive, wide-eyed and soft-palmed. A month later, they're indistinguishable from the rest of you. Starvation and sleeplessness are excellent equalizers. You stop asking why you're here. The answer's dried up long ago. Liberty? Justice? The noble experiment of democracy? You haven't heard those words in months. Now you think in simpler terms. Food, warmth, dry socks. You obey orders not because you believe in them, but because routine is the only thing separating you from madness. You wake, you march, you dig, you freeze, you sleep, if you're lucky. You've become a creature of habit and compromise. You sleep in damp clothes because dry ones don't exist. You eat weevil-riddled hardtack because that's all that's left. You use your sleeve as a napkin, your blanket as a coat, your bayonet as a tool for everything except stabbing people. You stop dreaming about home. It's not that you've forgotten it, it's that you're afraid to remember it too clearly. It hurts less that way. The battles still happen, but they no longer feel like milestones. They're just interruptions in the monotony. A few hours of screaming and smoke, followed by days of cleaning up and pretending the survivors didn't used to have names. You reload your musket with the muscle memory of someone brushing their teeth. Fire, ram, bite, load, fire again. You can do it half asleep. Sometimes you do. Letters stop arriving, either because no one's writing or because the courier lost interest. You stop writing back. You don't know what you'd say anyway. Still alive, still cold, still bleeding from somewhere. No one wants to read that. You assume the people who once waited for your return have either moved on or stopped waiting. You try not to think about it. It gets harder every winter. Your body rebels in small ways. A tooth falls out. Your joints crack when you stand. Your skin peels in odd places. You ignore it all. What's the alternative? Complain to the officer with the silk gloves? Ask the surgeon who believes whiskey is a cure for everything? You chew on willow bark and keep your boots laced. That's your version of self-care now. The officers rotate. Some die, some get reassigned, some vanish without explanation. You don't bother learning their names anymore. If they talk too much about God's favour, or glory, you assume they'll be gone soon. The ones who last are quiet, practical, tired-looking men with no illusions. You trust them more than you should. They don't promise anything. They just hand out maps and tell you when to duck. Occasionally, you hear rumours. France did this. The British surrendered there. The war is almost over. You don't believe it. You've heard it all before. You'll believe the war is over when someone hands you bread and tells you to go home, and even then you'll be suspicious. Hope is dangerous out here. It's a trap disguised as a kindness. You've stopped measuring time in days now. You measure it in scars, in miles, in men you've outlived. The guy who used to sing during marches? Gone. The boy who always asked for extra rations? Gone. The man who claimed to be a professor before the war? Gone. You're not sure what that makes you. Lucky? Maybe. But it doesn't feel like winning. It just feels like waiting to be next. The cause still exists somewhere, you assume. But it's not here, not in the mud and smoke and starvation. The war has become its own ecosystem. Self-sustaining. Self-consuming. It feeds on people like you. Not in dramatic bursts, but slowly, piece by piece. Your spirit, your body, your name. It wears you down until you're just another uniform, slumped against a tree, wondering if this frostbite will be the thing that finally ends it. And yet, you keep going. Not because you believe any more, but because stopping feels harder. Because marching is the only thing your legs still understand. Because quitting requires explaining yourself, and you're too tired to speak. You keep moving forward, one blister at a time. Eventually, someone says you've won. Not in a shout or a trumpet blast, but in the same tired voice that's been ordering you to dig trenches and reload muskets for the last several years. It's over, someone mutters, half in disbelief, half in relief. You blink, then blink again, trying to understand the words. For a moment, nothing changes. You're still sitting in the dirt, boots soaked through, coughing something wet into a rag that used to be white. You don't feel victorious, you feel cold. Cornwallis has surrendered, they say. The British stacked their arms. The war's over. Bells ring in some distant town, though you're not sure where. You hear about bonfires, celebrations. Somewhere, people are raising glasses and calling themselves patriots. Somewhere, men with clean hands are writing books and speeches about what you all endured. But here, in the mud and blood, it feels like just another day. Your stomach still growls. Your hands still shake. Your wound still leaks something you don't want to think about. No one throws a parade for you. There are no ribbons, no cheering crowds. There's no pension waiting with your name on it. No land deed pressed into your palm. The officers nod and disappear. Some get promoted. Others vanish like smoke, slipping into post-war politics, into mansions with doors you'll never be invited to knock on. You get nothing but a quiet order to pack your things, whatever's left of them, and start walking. To where? They don't say, just home, as if that's still a place that wants you. You sit for a long time before you move. Your legs stiff, your fingers are cracked. You dig at the edge of a scab with a dirty nail, and watch the blood come up slow, dark, tired. You cough again, deeper this time. It rattles in your ribs like something shaking loose. Someone nearby cheers half-heartedly. Another man weeps. You just stare at the ground, waiting to feel something. You don't. The march home, if you can call it that, isn't a march at all. It's more like a drift. No one has the energy to keep formation, and no one's pretending anymore. You walk in clumps like lost cattle, silent and grey-faced. No wagons come to help. No horses are offered. You limp, hitch rides on carts when you can, and sleep in abandoned barns when they're not already full. The rain doesn't stop just because the war did. You pass through towns that used to fly British flags, and now hang banners proclaiming liberty. They don't look much different. The same potholes in the roads, the same guarded stairs. A shopkeeper nods at you, then closes the door. You catch your reflection in a broken window and barely recognise yourself. Hollow eyes, patchy beard, a coat that looks like it survived a fire. You keep walking. When you finally reach whatever remains of home, it's smaller than you remember. The roof sags, the fields are weeds. The people you left are either older or gone. You knock on the door of a neighbour who once shared bread with your family. He squints at you for a long time before opening the gate. You don't blame him. You'd hesitate too if a ghost showed up in broad daylight. There are no medals, no compensation, just vague promises about future benefits, signed by men who never missed a meal during the war. You hear rumours about land grants out west. You'd have to fight for it, of course, against people who already live there, against the wilderness itself. You consider it for a day, then decide you've fought enough for one lifetime. Sometimes you sit outside and listen to the wind. Try to convince yourself that peace feels different. It doesn't. And not really. It's just quiet in a way that doesn't comfort. You get used to the silence, but you don't trust it. Part of you is always waiting for the next order, the next march, the next musket crack. Your body doesn't know how to stop. People call you a hero now and then. Strangers at the market. Someone's uncle who wants to impress their children. You nod and grunt and say as little as possible. What would you even say? That liberty tastes like mouldy hardtack and blood? That you watched a dozen men die for a hill no one remembers the name of? That freedom came with trench rot, lies, and your best friend's boots, which you still wear because yours gave out 2 winters ago. You survived the war, but you didn't walk away from it. It clings to you, in your joints, in your dreams, in the way you flinch at sudden noises and avoid mirrors. Independence may be a concept, but you're just a body with a heartbeat and a 1,000-yard stare, limping through the ashes of a war that took more than it gave. And they say you won. Years pass and you're still poor, still limping, still waking up with the war lodged somewhere deep in your chest, like shrapnel no one thought to remove. You shuffle through life with a gait that never quite corrected, favouring one side because the other side never healed right. You don't complain, not because it doesn't hurt, but because complaining requires someone who's still listening. There isn't. Congress never sent your promised pay, not the back wages, not the enlistment bonus, not the land grant that was supposed to make all this worthwhile. You wrote letters, got nothing, walked to the courthouse once hoping to speak to someone official. The clerk didn't look up from his ink-stained ledger, just told you to wait for your name to be called. It never was. You left before sunset, your boots splitting further along the seams, and the long walk home was quieter than it should have been. People move on quickly, that's what you've learned. The revolution ended, the bells rang, and the country put on a fresh coat of paint. Cities grew, roads were paved, and flags were stitched by hands that never smelled powder or dug graves. New faces rose in the government, polished and articulate, speaking of a brighter future, while stepping carefully over the bones it was built on. You watch them on occasion, those men in tailored coats and powdered wigs, and you wonder if they've ever seen a body bleed out in the rain. No one remembers your name. Sometimes they remember the unit you served with, or the battle you almost died in, but not you. You were just one of thousands, a pair of hands holding a musket, a number in a report. When people talk about the war now, they do it with gloss and shine, like it was a noble trial passed with flying colours. They skip the starvation, the frostbite, the men who froze to death with their eyes open. That part doesn't make for good speeches. You try to tell your story once at the tavern, just once. A man was boasting about his uncle's heroics at Yorktown, so you spoke up, told him what it was really like, the mud, the panic, the silence after the cannon stopped, and the way your ears rang for days. He laughed, said you must be mistaken, said that's not how it was in the history book his boy brought home from school. You didn't argue, you just left. Haven't tried again since. People want heroes, symbols, men who stood tall and clean and righteous. They don't want you. You're not carved from marble. You're not the kind of story they tell children to make them stand during the anthem. You're the other kind, the kind they bury behind euphemisms and metaphors. You're not a hero, you're just what's left, a body that survived the war and lived long enough to wonder why. Your neighbours respect you in the distant way people respect an old tree that might fall on their house. They nod at you, ask if your leg still hurts, offer scraps of sympathy between gulps of beer, but they don't want the details. They don't want the smell of rot and smoke in their living room, so you keep it brief. It was hard, you say. That's all they need, that's all they want. Your clothes wear thin. You patch them until there's more stitch than fabric. Your coat still carries the faint, ghostly outline of your regiment's insignia. Long since faded and threadbare, the boots you took off a dead man are finally giving out. You tried to save for new ones, but money disappears fast when you're living on promises. You fix what you can. You limp the rest of the way. Sometimes in the quiet you try to remember the first time you fired a musket, the smell of powder, the weight of it in your arms. You try to recall who stood beside you, what his name was, what happened to him. But it's all blurred now, like a dream you had too long ago to recount. The faces are faded, the words are gone. You remember the cold, you remember the hunger. But the men, they slip away like smoke. There are statues now, big ones, cast in bronze and planted in city squares, surrounded by flowers and pigeons. They call them monuments. You visit one once, leaning on your cane, squinting at the plaque. It lists battles, dates, names you almost recognise. It says the country is grateful. You wait a moment, expecting something. A feeling, a spark, but there's nothing. Just pigeons and silence, and the slow realisation that they didn't build it for you. The war ended and a republic rose from the ashes. But you were just kindling, fuel for the fire. And now that it's burning bright, no one remembers what they threw in to start it. But you remember, and maybe that's enough. That brings us to the end of tonight's story, not of generals or glory, but of worn-out boots, forgotten names, and the long, slow rot beneath the flag. If you're still awake, thank you for walking that road with me, for remembering the soldier who came home with nothing but blisters and silence. If you'd like early access to more stories like this, ad-free audio of these episodes, or just want to support the show, the Patreon link is in the description. You can also like, subscribe, or leave a comment with other history topics you'd like to see covered. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. Sleep well.